The dashboard clock in Ethan's beat-up Honda Civic flickered, its dull green glow casting a sickly hue over his tired face. 11:44 p.m. He was lost, and his GPS had been dead for the last 20 miles. Ethan was a pragmatist, a software engineer who dealt in logic, code, and hard data. When his map app froze and redirected him off the main interstate onto a winding, unlit state road, he hadn't panicked. He had simply assumed it was a shortcut through the dense pine forests of western Pennsylvania. But the road, known on the faded, rusted wooden sign he had passed a mile back as Blackwood Lane, felt less like a shortcut and more like a descent. The trees here grew aggressively close to the asphalt, their twisted, leafless branches weaving together overhead to form a suffocating canopy. The headlights of his car cut feeble tunnels into a fog that had rolled in out of nowhere, thick, soup-like, and smelling faintly of stagnant water and copper. Just 10 more miles, Ethan muttered to himself, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The radio hissed, throwing out nothing but static that sounded unnervingly like rhythmic breathing. Then, the headlights caught something up ahead. The first warning. Ethan slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched against the damp asphalt, the car skidding slightly before coming to a dead stop. Standing in the dead center of the road, just on the periphery of his high beams, was a figure. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He blinked, straining his eyes through the smeared windshield. It looked like a woman, dressed in a faded, dirt-streaked yellow sundress. Her back was turned to him. Her long, dark hair hung in matted clumps down her spine. She was completely motionless, unaffected by the chill night air or the glaring lights of his vehicle. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, rolling his window down an inch. The air that rushed in was freezing, carrying that sharp, metallic stench of copper. "Hey! Do you need help?" The woman didn't move. Ethan shifted the car into park but left the engine idling. He hesitated, his survival instinct screaming at him to put the car in reverse and floor it. But what if she was hurt? What if she was a victim of a car wreck further up the road? He opened the door. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the dead silence of the forest. "Miss," he called out, stepping onto the damp asphalt. The moment his foot touched the ground, the woman's head snapped. Not a smooth turn, but a violent, sickening crack, a full 90 degrees to the right, resting flat against her shoulder. She didn't turn her body. Her head just hung there, broken, as she began to rotate at the waist to face him. Ethan didn't wait to see her face. A primal, electric terror surged through his veins. He scrambled back into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and threw the car into reverse. He stomped on the gas. The engine roared, and the car flew backward. He checked his rearview mirror, expecting to see the empty road behind him, but the fog was too thick. Suddenly, the car bumped violently, as if running over a massive pothole. The engine sputtered, groaned, and died. The headlights flickered twice, then went completely dark. Dead on the asphalt. The silence that followed was absolute. No crickets. No wind. Just the sound of Ethan's ragged, panicked breathing. "Come on, come on, come on," he whispered, frantically turning the key in the ignition. The starter clicked weakly. Click. 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 The battery was completely drained. He looked through the windshield. The fog had pressed itself right against the glass, blinding him. He couldn't see the woman in the yellow dress anymore. He couldn't see the trees. He was trapped in a tiny metal box floating in a sea of white mist. The rules of Blackwood Lane. Never step out of the vehicle after midnight. If you hear knocking, do not look at the windows. The road does not end until it lets you go. Ethan didn't know these rules, but he was about to learn them the hard way. Thump. A heavy, dull sound echoed from the roof of the car. Ethan froze, his hand locking on the ignition key. Thump. Thump. It sounded like something heavy was crawling across the roof. The thin metal groaned under the weight. Ethan looked up, terrified that the fabric lining of the ceiling would cave in. He could hear the distinct sound of dragging, like wet fabric pulling across the metal surface. Then, it stopped. For 2 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Ethan forced himself to breathe slowly, trying to convince his rational mind that a tree branch had fallen on the car. Yes, a tree branch. That had to be it. Then came the scratching. It started at the back windshield. A sharp, rhythmic scraping, like fingernails dragging across glass. Screech. Screech. It moved along the side of the car, traveling toward the driver's side window. Ethan pressed himself as far into the passenger seat as he could go, his eyes locked on the dark glass of his door. The scratching stopped right outside his window. The fog outside the glass seemed to shift, parting just enough to reveal a face pressed flat against the window. It was the woman in the yellow dress. But it wasn't a human face anymore. The skin was bloated and gray, like a corpse that had spent weeks underwater. Her eyes were wide, milky white spheres with no pupils, and her jaw hung open at an impossible, unhinged angle, exposing a row of jagged, black teeth. She tapped her fingernail against the glass. Tap. 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 She smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched from ear to ear, splitting the gray skin at the corners of her mouth. Ethan let out a strangled cry, burying his face in his hands. He squeezed his eyes shut, praying, crying, waiting for the glass to shatter. Instead, a blinding flash of light pierced through his eyelids. The phantom headlights. Ethan opened his eyes. The face was gone. Rushing up from behind his car were 2 massive, bright headlights. A vehicle was approaching fast. The glare flooded his cabin, bringing a sudden, overwhelming wave of relief. "Hey! Over here!" Ethan shouted, forgetting his fear as he rolled down his window and waved his arm frantically outside. An old, rusted semi-truck loomed out of the fog, its massive chrome grille roaring toward him. It didn't look like it was slowing down. In fact, it was accelerating, aiming directly for his stalled Honda. Ethan's relief instantly vaporized into pure panic. "Stop! Stop!" he screamed. The truck was less than 50 feet away, its horn blaring a deafening, demonic wail that sounded like a chorus of screaming voices. Ethan braced for impact, throwing himself across the center console and covering his head. The roar of the engine was deafening. The light was blinding. And then, nothing. No impact. No crunching metal. No shattering glass. Ethan slowly lifted his head. The light was gone. The roaring had vanished. The road behind him was empty, shrouded in the same heavy, suffocating fog. He looked out the window. The semi-truck had simply passed through him, leaving behind nothing but the overwhelming stench of burning diesel and rotting wood. His car engine suddenly roared to life on its own. The dashboard lights snapped back on, glowing that same sickly green. 12 a.m. Ethan didn't hesitate. He slammed the car into drive and floored the accelerator, the tires smoking as they gripped the wet asphalt. He didn't care where the road went anymore, he just needed to run. The endless loop. The speedometer climbed. 50 miles per hour, 60 miles per hour, 70 miles per hour. Blackwood Lane twisted and turned like a dying snake. Ethan threw the car into sharp corners, the tires screeching, the headlights cutting through the fog just enough to keep him from driving into the trees. But as the minutes ticked by, a horrible realization began to settle in his gut. He passed a rusted wooden sign on the right side of the road. Blackwood Lane. 5 minutes later, he passed it again. Blackwood Lane. 5 minutes after that, the sign appeared a third time. No, this is impossible," Ethan stammered, his voice cracking with hysteria. He was driving in a straight line, yet the road was looping. The forest was repeating itself. Every twisted tree, every mist-shrouded boulder, every curve in the asphalt was identical to the one before it. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 12 a.m. He looked at his wrist watch. 12 a.m. Time had stopped. The road had claimed him, locking him in a pocket of reality where the only exit was the one they chose to give him. Up ahead, the headlights caught something new. The fog parted to reveal the scene of a horrific accident. A silver sedan was wrapped around a massive oak tree, its front end completely crushed. Debris was scattered across the road, shattered glass, a broken bumper, and clothes strewn about. Smoke poured from the crumpled hood. Ethan slowed down, his heart sinking into his shoes. As he drew closer, he saw a figure sitting on the asphalt next to the wrecked car. It was a man, holding his head in his hands, rocking back and forth. He wore a blue flannel shirt and jeans. Ethan's breath hitched. That shirt. Those jeans. He stopped his car just a few feet away from the wreck. The man by the tree slowly lifted his head, looking directly into Ethan's headlights. Ethan gasped, choking on his own breath. The man by the tree was him. It was Ethan. His own face, covered in blood, eyes wide with a mixture of agony and disbelief. The phantom version of Ethan stared directly through the windshield at the living Ethan, raised a trembling, bloody finger, and pointed behind the car. The passengers. Before Ethan could process the cosmic horror of looking at his own dying self, a cold hand clamped tightly around his right shoulder. An icy breath brushed against his ear, smelling of rot and copper. "You shouldn't have taken the shortcut," a raspy, dual-toned voice whispered from the back seat. Ethan's body went entirely rigid. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror. Sitting in the back seat of his Honda Civic were three figures. In the middle was the woman in the yellow sundress, her broken neck resting on her shoulder, her milky eyes staring at him with twisted glee. To her left was a burnt, blackened corpse, its flesh still smoking, its jaw locked in a permanent scream. To her right was an old man, his face missing entirely, replaced by a hollow cavity of squirming shadow. The locks on all four doors clicked down simultaneously. Snap! The phantom Ethan outside vanished. The wreck vanished. There was only the endless, dark road ahead, the thick fog, and the hitchhikers he had unknowingly picked up. Ethan tried to scream, but the cold hand on his shoulder tightened, sinking into his flesh like ice-cold iron. The green dashboard clock flickered violently, the numbers spinning wildly before settling back on 12 a.m. The car began to accelerate on its own, the steering wheel twisting out of Ethan's grip. The headlights died once more, but the car kept moving forward into the pitch-black abyss of Blackwood Lane. Epilogue. The next morning, the sun rose over western Pennsylvania, burning away the thick fog that had choked the state roads during the night. A state trooper pulled his cruiser over to the shoulder of a quiet, sunlit two-lane highway. He got out, drinking a cup of black coffee, and walked toward a faded, rusted wooden sign that read Blackwood Lane. Just past the sign, resting gently against a massive, ancient oak tree, was a beat-up Honda Civic. There was no damage to the car. No dents, no broken glass. The keys were still in the ignition, turned to the on position, but the battery was completely dead. The trooper walked up to the driver's side window and peered inside. The car was entirely empty. There was no sign of the driver, no wallet, no phone. The only thing left behind was a strange, thick layer of damp fog condensation on the inside of the windows, and the faint, unmistakable smell of copper and old wood. The trooper sighed, shaking his head. He pulled his radio from his belt. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I've got another abandoned vehicle out on Blackwood Lane. Send a tow truck." He turned back to his cruiser, completely unaware of the pale, bloated face watching him from the deep, dark shadows of the pine forest just a few feet away.